I too have seen weird shit as a Marine. New Guy Pier by Rev Black Rage. I've told a few other tales about weird shit during my Marine Corps career. A lot of people seem to have liked them, so I'll throw another one down for you. So, back in late 2007, I was attached to an MEU, a Marine Expeditionary Unit. It was my first deployment. We embarked aboard the USS Shreveport, which was an LPD, and I have no idea what it stands for. But it was an amphibious assault ship, which meant it carried Marines up to the enemy shoreline, and launched a platoon of amphibious assault vehicles carrying infantry, as well as a couple of giant hovercrafts called LCACs, which carry everything from tanks to gun trucks. Sometimes it just launches AAVs to carry Marines onto foreign lands, to train on foreign bases and train foreign troops, which is a lot less fun than it sounds. They're usually third world troops who were conscripted that same morning. Training them, or with them, is usually confusing, dangerous, and frustrating. Plus, they usually smell bad. It was also the reason our platoon was sitting in the ass of the old ship, getting a briefing about something we already knew how to do. We were going to splash off the coast of Kuwait, land on Kuwaiti soil, and go and train Kuwaiti soldiers on how to be Kuwaiti soldiers. Don't worry about your tax dollars being spent. The host nation usually pays us to do it. And remember, the platoon commander said to the school circle of Marines gathered before him, we will be landing on the boat ramp next to New Guy Pier. So, what's that mean? Strong currents and the thing we don't talk about. So, stay on your toes. Crew chiefs, make sure you have a weapon available. And if you've never landed on New Guy Pier before, oh boy will you have a story to tell. Don't be the guy to hit the pier, or the first round's on you at our next Liberty Post. The state of the sea should be at 1. Nice calm waters. Make final preparations and get to the vehicles. Let's have a safe day of operating, and once again, remember, don't talk about it, gents. I looked around in confusion. The senior staff non-commissioned officers were at the back of the school circle, just glaring daggers at the lieutenant. The sergeants were rolling their eyes in a "this dumb motherfucker" fashion. I noticed a few of the more salty corporals, one of which had happened to be my crew chief, staring at the LT with his mouth hanging open. Like, they couldn't believe the LT was dumb enough to even bring it up. I was walking away and I heard our platoon sergeant saying, well, now they're gonna talk about it, sir. That last word was laced with about as much respectful disrespect as the gunny could put into it. Well, that was certainly a bizarre splash brief, I remember thinking. The thing we don't talk about. The hell does that mean? I looked over at my crew chief, the guy who commands the vehicle I was assigned to, walking through our upper deck towards the vehicle, which was parked near the rear, behind most of the platoon's vehicles. The place that I needed to be. I had questions, and he would have been the guy to ask. Corporal, I started with that confusion in my voice that all boot Marines seem to have. What's the thing we don't talk about? He stopped in his tracks, turned, and just glared at me. It's the fucking thing that we don't fucking talk about, dumbass, my crew chief said. As you might have guessed, there was some agitation in his voice. Aye aye, Corp. It was all I could say. It was just best to avoid the ass chewing by dropping the subject. Our rear crewman caught up with us as we walked to our track. I knew he was going to ask the same question I had just asked. I looked over my shoulder and looked at him and shook my head, trying to look as salty as possible. He gave me a questioning look. I nodded my head towards the crew chief and looked back at the rear of the crewman and shook my head. He gave me a what the fuck face. I responded with the facial equivalent of a shrug. He knew exactly what I meant. Boss, don't want to talk about it. Nonverbal communication is a vital part of the Marine Corps culture. I've seen complicated concepts discussed at length, with only grunting and pointing. We really are just a pack of trained apes. We got into the vehicle and started making final preparations for ship-to-shore movement. I had just finished checking the generator belt and put the engine panel back on, and when I looked over behind me, My crew chief was pulling an aluminum baseball bat out of one of his sea bags. The grip was neon green, but the barrel was black. It had the word Psycho printed on the thick end. This in neon green as well. He looked at me. I must have had a curious look on my face. He brought the tip of the bat up and drew it across his lips. Shh. I was getting kind of annoyed with all of this don't talk about it shit. What weren't we supposed to talk about? Was it hard to land on the boat ramp? If there was some shit I needed to know as the driver, I should know it. But I knew that I wasn't going to get an answer, which was some bullshit. My crew chief reversed the bat with a one-handed flip, holding the grip outwards towards me. Something on his face softened. My weapon of choice for this sort of shit, he said with an uncomfortable chuckle. Put it in the turret for me. I grabbed the grip and made it to pull away, but he held on. I looked up from the bat to his face, his eyes drilled into mine. Remember, he said. I got your back, whatever happens. You keep this big bitch swimming. That is your only job. He put his hand on the radio cage, a bit of loving affection towards the 26-ton amphibious war machine. She's our slam piece. She likes to take care of her studs. His eyes turned towards our rear crewman, or dungeon master, as was the nickname for his billet. You usually ride in the troop commander hatch on a splash with no infantry embarked, but I want you to ride down here in the dungeon. Make sure that hatch stays locked. Might get a little weird back here since that dumb fuck LT ran his mouth. He punctuated the statement with an eye roll. Keep your eyes on that fucking lock. He released the bat into my grip. I knew I had to have a stunned look on my face because that was a fucking stunner of a speech. I looked over at our rear crewman. He had a duplicate wide-eyed look on his face. Well, put my fucking bat in my fucking turret, my crew chief growled, or you'll be busting rust on track blocks until our shit fucking glows. The threat of an endless task lit fire under my ass. I climbed up into the turret and shoved the bat into the back of it, where the spare 50 cal ammo went. He had to be fucking with us, I remember thinking. I felt something tug my leg. I looked down into our troop compartment. My crew chief was holding on to something that looked like a folded up harness of some sort. Put this in there too, he said. Damn, Corp, I said, taking the harness. What kind of freaky shit you get up to in here? Oh, you'll fucking see, he said with an ominous grin. I climbed out of the turret hatch and got up to the top of the vehicle, to double check that the gear we stowed in the cargo was strapped down. I took a look down into the well deck at the giant LCAC, sitting on deflated airbags. I noticed one of the sailors who crewed up the thing walking across the giant open cargo deck. Nothing looked unusual about him, except he had an old-school naval cutlass strapped to his waist. Motherfucker think we're off the coast of Somalia? I remember thinking. Is he expecting pirates? Time passed quickly. I found myself sitting in the driver's station of my vehicle. The ass end of the ship had opened up. The LCAC had already left the lower well deck. Sailors up on the catwalks, both sides of the well deck, using flashlights and hand signals, guided us into position. One by one, the AAVs were given the signal to drive out of the back of the ship, splash into the Persian Gulf in about 300 feet of deep water, and hope like hell nothing went wrong. The anticipation was driving me nuts. One would floor it out of the back of the ship, the next tractor would slowly trundle up and take its launch spot. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. This was early in my career, and this sort of thing still held a lot of excitement for me. I was watching the red light at the end of the ship. It hit green and I floored it. I was doing my best to make it up into fourth gear, because if you go too slow, it's possible to nosedive that bitch and ride it all the way to the ocean floor. And that is where you don't want to be. You want as much speed as possible when you drive off that ship. The track roared as it gave me everything it had. I managed to catch another gear, and I made it into third gear before the ground dropped out from under me. Yeehaw. The track hit the water nose first. They usually bob back up, easy peasy. This time, though, it was different. I watched the ocean come up in front of my vehicle at me, through my little vision block. My view went from bright blue skies to a murky green infinite expanse. It was surreal. Now, normally, the track bobs up instantaneously. Not this time, though. The track sort of hung there for a second, nose down in the water. It felt like forever. But it couldn't have been more than a couple seconds. Almost felt like we were pushing deeper into the water. The pucker factor was definitely in play. I eased off the throttle out of reflex. I finally felt the track starting to pull back up towards the surface. I let out a sigh of relief right before my vision block broke the surface. I caught the impression of something moving. Way out at the edge of my visibility. Looked big. That's all I caught as we bobbed back to the surface.
Track 9?
My crew chief called out over the radio, his voice coming through my helmet.
Feet wet.
I didn't have time to think about the big moving thing. I had to clear out of the way of oncoming vehicles. So I gunned it and pushed it further from the ship. We got about 50 meters out before I let off the throttle again and threw my hatch open. I pulled up my seat so I could ride with my head out in full visibility. I looked up at the turret. My crew chief had popped his hatch as well. His upper body was out of the turret. He looked down at me and gave me a thumbs up. I nodded and gunned it. The track roared and sludged forward. I had noticed that he was gripping his baseball bat in his right hand. It was pretty uneventful for the moment, for the most part. Up until the halfway point. Then, shit got weird. We lost all external comms because of course we fucking did. The crew chief got the attention of the crew chief in the track behind us. Using one of his hand signals, told them that the comms were dead. All we could do in that situation is just keep pushing it and hope that we didn't need immediate help. Nothing really you can do in the middle of the ocean. Just relax and enjoy the ride. I was cruising along, enjoying being off that fucking ship for a bit, when I looked down at my gauges. Temps were normal, pressure was good. The fuel gauge was acting wonky, but no worries though. I knew we had a full tank of JP8 diesel. I looked up from the console and there was a hand sitting in front of my hatch. A human one. The arm was hanging down the side of the vehicle. I just stared at it for a moment. It hadn't been there a second ago. That's not supposed to be there, I remember thinking. The pointer finger started moving around first. Then the rest of the fingers followed suit, rubbing along the rough surface, like the hand was looking for something. I felt a shadow come over me, and a green blur came out of the right side of my vision, impacting the hand and sending it skittering over the side into the ocean below. I felt more than heard the bat clinging off the vehicle's metal skin. I looked up and my crew chief was standing above me, his bat in hand. He was wearing the harness that was anchored to the turret. He looked down at me, pointed 2 fingers at his eyes, then one at me, and then at the ocean ahead of us. The Kuwaiti coat was about a half a mile in the distance. I got it. Watch the road. I turned my attention back to the water in front of us.
Corporal?
The rear crewman came over the inter-vehicle comms in our helmets.
The rear hatch handle is banging against the latch bar, like someone's trying to open it.
That was unusual. Even in heavy seas, the back door handle rarely moved. It was made that way.
Keep an eye on it,
the corporal responded.
Make sure that bitch stays closed. I don't care if you have to put your boot on the fucker and ride it like that.
He looked down at me and said, "Keep her swimming, Boot." He didn't climb back into his turret. He just stood on top of the vehicle, rolling his legs along with the bobbing and rolling vehicle, so he could stand up. His eyes scanning around the edge of our track. Fucking weird bullshit, I muttered. I caught sight of the crew chief moving slowly towards the edge of the vehicle, doing his best to stay upright on the bobbing vehicle, swatting his bat at something outside of my sight. I kept pushing it towards the coastline. I would occasionally see the crew chief moving behind me out of the corner of my eye. I turned to watch him swat at something with the bat. I looked past him to the track behind me. That tractor's crew chief was out of his turret too, patrolling the top of the vehicle, swinging his axe at something that I couldn't see. Just what in the holy fuck is going on? I said out loud to myself. The front of the vehicle dipped as if we were riding through a wave. But there were no waves to be dipping in. I spun around to face front. Hands. Hundreds of hands. Gray bloated fingers gripping anything they could find purchase on. The tractor felt almost as if it were being pulled down nose first. Water started washing up over the front of the vehicle. That was bad. If too much water got on top of the vehicle, it would collapse the barrier that keeps the water out of the engine compartment under the weight, and flood the track faster than our bilge pumps could keep up with. We would sink. "At our 12! I yelled into the intercom through my CVC helmet while backing off the throttle. My crew chief ran past me, swinging the baseball bat. Every time he made contact with one of the hands, their grip broke open and they fell back into the water. Some would rise back up out of the water, but my crew chief seemed to be making pretty good headway against them. I could feel the nose start to rise back out of the water. I ripped the throttle wide open, sending us straight out of there. The old tractor gave me everything it had. It wasn't much. It's got a maximum speed of 8 knots in the water, a little over 9 miles an hour. Not exactly the get the fuck out of here speed. A hand came out of the water and grabbed my crew chief's boot, pulling his leg out from under him, planting him firmly on his ass. He seized up, his body going rigid. Initially, I thought that he might have hit his head. That was until water started spilling out of his mouth. What the fuck? He looked back at me, eyes wide. His pupils started to roll into the back of his head. More hands grabbed his legs and started pulling him forward. I reached out and grabbed the carry handle on his plate carrier. I'm a big dude. I can pick up heavy things and put them down. But this was like trying to pull a dump truck out of quicksand. I took my other hand off the steering yoke and grabbed one of his shoulder straps and started pulling him back.
"We got fucking problems back here,"
my rear crewman screamed over the intercom. "We got fucking problems up here!" I just shouted out loud. I didn't exactly have a free hand to key out the mic. He wouldn't have heard me over the noise of the engine. My crew chief was limp. His eyes were open. All I could see is his white eye sockets. I braced both of my feet on the console of the driver's station and pulled with everything I had. I was keeping him from sliding, but I wasn't exactly pulling him free. I reached down to the knife I kept on my body armor and yanked it out. I shifted my one-hand grip to the front of his body armor. I leaned forward until I was almost all of the way out of the hatch, and I started slashing and stabbing the hands. They were withdrawing when they took some damage. I caught one at the wrist, almost severing the hand. It withdrew, almost taking my knife with it, the hand flopping around uselessly at the end of its stump. A black substance that I mistook for blood sprayed from the half-severed hand. It splashed across my face, and I got a taste of salt water. I ignored it and continued pulling my crew chief off the nose of the vehicle. The second that last hand broke contact with his leg, he regained consciousness and immediately started vomiting out what looked like water. I pulled back into my hatch, one hand on the steering yoke and the other arm draped protectively over the vomiting Marine. We were free of the hands for the moment. "Fuck, that sucked," he said, spitting out the last of the saltwater puke. "Owe you one, Boot." He sat there for a second getting his head right, before picking up his baseball bat. I noticed that we were getting close to the pier, maybe about 200 meters away. It looked ancient, like a holdover from the 1800s, which it might very well have been. It was off to the left of an old boat ramp. I noticed that the front of the tractor was starting to go nose up out of the water. Crew chief noticed it too.
"You good back there?"
He asked the rear crewman through his CVC helmet.
"Fuck no!"
He damn near screamed over the intercom.
"I'm fucking ankle deep in water back here. No idea where the fuck it's coming from. It's just coming up through the deck plates. Pieces of shit must have pulled out our drain plugs."
The crew chief grumbled mysteriously.
"We aren't that far from the boat ramp. If it's only ankle deep, we'll probably be okay. Let me know if it gets balls deep."
The first of the tractors were already on land. I could see them tearing ass up the boat ramp. I looked at my crew chief. I shot him a thumbs up. We were almost out of it. He started to return it, but a wide-eyed oh shit look graced his features instead. That's when I felt my throat squeeze shut, like I had stuck my neck in a fucking vice made out of fingers. My lungs went full, and something pushed up my esophagus. Seawater. I felt it draining out of the corners of my mouth, out through my nostrils, before I forced open my mouth and sent water spilling down my chin. It felt like there was no air left in my body. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever experienced. I kept trying to suck in mouthfuls of air, but all I could get was more seawater. My vision grew dim and shrunk down to pinpricks of light, and finally went black. I had a sensation like I was floating. I opened my eyes, and nothing but blurry, murky green as far as the eye could see. No notion of kicking off my boots and swimming up. I didn't even reach for the cord hanging out under my body armor, the cord that would inflate my life jacket. I didn't even think about pulling off my body armor. I was content to just float there. I've never felt that calm in my life. No worries, no nothing. Even when I started to sink. The water got darker the further down I went, the murky green slowly fading into black. I heard a noise that sounded like a metal pipe clanging off something in the distance, but I ignored it. I felt my eyes getting heavy. I barely considered fighting it. Why stay awake? It's so nice down here. I heard another clang off in the distance. Louder. Closer. I looked around at the dark. There was a sort of warmth growing in my chest. I savored the feeling. I could have stayed down there for forever. I heard one last clang. This time it sounded like it was next to my head. Air rushed back into my lungs and I was jerked back into this world. Bright Arabian sunshine flooded my world, harsh as hell after being in that watery void. I was hanging out of the driver's hatch. I was alive. I felt like I had to vomit, so I did. Water rushing up my throat, hosing down everything in front of me with a salty froth, leaving me with a feeling like I had just applied a belt sander to my esophagus. My crew chief was looking down at me. He flashed me the thumbs up. I just stared up at him, feeling and most likely looking like a bag of mashed up assholes, before I managed to weakly flash the gesture back at him. He nodded down at me and pointed in front of us. We were about 20 feet off a new Guy Pier, floating towards it. "Straighten us out," he said as he climbed back into the turret. I did my best not to slam into New Guy Pier. I really did. But I was pretty fucking out of it. I mean, I had just been pulled back into the world of the living and vomited my guts out. You get put in charge of driving a 26-ton armored amphibious vehicle, and after that, tell me how well you did. I had just gotten my bearings back when I felt the track slam into the pier. It wasn't a bone-crunching hit, but it was enough to seriously dent some of the armor plates installed on the side of the vehicle. The jolt of the track slamming into the old timbers rung the fuck out of my bell. I looked up at my crew chief. He shrugged it off with a don't sweat it kind of motion. He was too tired to be pissed. I could understand that. I felt like a well-used punching bag myself. Outside of that, coming ashore was fairly easy. I guess the god of shallow current riptides was in a forgiving mood that day. I felt the tracks meet up on the concrete of the boat ramp, and the vehicle stopped floating. It was the sort of feeling that you just want to bottle up and save for later. Finally safe. I flipped the switch that took the vehicle out of water mode onto land mode, and charged the boat up the ramp, ready to get out of that fucking water. The tractor felt heavier than normal, probably because of all that seawater it had picked up through the missing hull drain plugs. We pulled off the ramp and moved off to the side of the road leading off of it. We let it idle for a minute, before letting the back ramp down. Gallons and gallons and gallons of water came spilling out, along with everything that wasn't strapped down. All of our shit below knee level was just soaked. The platoon commander's vehicle was about 10 feet from ours, parked in a spot, so the lieutenant could watch the vehicles continue to come ashore. He turned and grinned at us from his turret. He motioned for me to take off my helmet, so I did. The world suddenly getting much louder without the sound dampening effect of the CVC helmet. I got the feeling that he had a pretty easy time coming ashore. I think the hands must have missed his track. "I saw that," he yelled over the engine noise, positively sounding giddy. "You hit the pier! That means the first round is on!" He was cut off as he dove out of the way, a black and green baseball bat hurling through the air at him.
"I hate that fucking boot,"
my crew chief grumbled over the comms. Guys, thank you for watching. I hope you're enjoying this series. And by the way, I actually looked up a video of AAVs coming off of the boat he was talking about. It's pretty intense. But I would like to thank my $10 and above patrons: Dan R, Paul Z, Mr. Swiston, Official Jerboa, Chaos X, JY, Pyromancer, Hayden MH, and Ethan A. Thank you guys so much. You are single-handedly keeping the channel alive, along with all the patrons down in the description at the $5 tier. If you want your name read off at the end of the video, and if you want some Patreon-only content, stuff that's a little too spicy for YouTube, please go over there and join up. Thank you.